Hello, welcome back, Scorecard Sports family. I am one half of your duo, the ambiguous assassin Sapan. I'm back to give you my picks for a okay fight card this weekend between Song Yadong versus Chris Gutierrez. It has a lot of great prospects coming up on it that could end up becoming big players in the UFC's future plans going forward. Without further ado, let's get started. The first fight between Rayanne Amanda and Talita Alencar. I might have butchered that, but let's go on. So I believe in this fight, Talita is a multiple time Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu champion with the IBJJF and is a amazing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner with great kicks. And if the fight hits the ground, she'll have a significant advantage. However, I believe she only has about 4 or 5 fights total, making her pretty green in mixed martial arts. And I believe that's something her opponent, Amanda, can take advantage of. She is, in my opinion, has a better movement out of the two, is the better striker, better boxing. She does a great job moving in and out with her flurries, mixing in takedowns, clinches. And in this fight, I believe she'll have a wrestling advantage, which will be a massive factor in this fight because it will allow her to either get the fight to the ground or keep it on the feet, which I believe she will do to win this fight. If she can keep the fight on the feet, land her boxing, use her movement to really stifle Talita, who has struggled with fighters that move in front of her before, and really make it hard for her to find those kicks and get her takedowns and really work her offense. And Amanda has shown the ability to kind of keep that up for 15 minutes. So I have to go with Amanda in this fight, probably by decision. Going on to the next fight between Japanese superstar Tatsuro Taira and Carlos Hernandez. I don't think there's much to say with this fight. It seems like they are setting up Tatsuro Taira to get a great win against Carlos Hernandez, as he will have a massive advantage on the ground. And I believe this fight will also allow him to showcase some of his improved striking, which has improved every fight we've seen him in. So I'll have to go with Tatsuro Taira, and I think he'll probably get a submission in the second or the third round. Moving on to Luana Santos versus Stephanie Egger. I think in this fight, Luana Santos will have an advantage on the feet striking. She also is not too bad on the ground as well, but on the feet is where I believe she will want to keep this fight, as she is definitely the faster of the two. She has great, sharp, straight shots, good kicks. She's great at maintaining range with her strikes as well. One thing she does that I'm not the biggest fan of is sometimes in her boxing, her punches, instead of hitting with power, can almost be more slapping shots with her hooks, and sometimes her straights like down, almost downward slaps. But against Stephanie Egger on the feet is slower, not as mechanically there, and a lot of her takedowns are predicated around the head and arm throw, which I've said in the past I'm not a big fan of, as it never really secures a clean takedown. And if Stephanie Egger is to get her down with this technique, I believe, because of the scramble it causes once you throw the technique in there, I believe Luana Santos will be able to get back to her feet, will be able to maybe even sweep or get an underhook and work from there. And also with Egger, she also mainly just looks for this technique. Sometimes she'll look for inside trips, but when you know the head and arm throw is what your opponent is looking for, it becomes easier to stop, as you just need to kind of sit your butt down, get your weight back to stifle the throw. And I think Luana Santos can do that, keep the fight on the feet, where she has an advantage and win that way, whether it's by TKO or decision. I have to go with Luana Santos. The next fight is actually one that was scheduled for a few weeks ago, which was Steve Garcia versus Manuel Costa. In this fight, I've already given my breakdown for this fight, but it stayed widely the same. I believe in this matchup, Mademoiselle's Costa's strength, his kicks, his size, and his takedown defense, which is very, very good, will be the deciding factor in this fight and allow him to outstrike Steve Garcia and get the win by either knockout or decision. Moving on up the card to Hyun Sung Park and Shannon Ross. Hyun Sung Park had just won the Asian Road to the Octagon series against Choi in that fight. It was a fight in which he was losing, and he actually made a great mid-fight adjustment going into the third round, implementing a more grapple-heavy game plan and actually being able to pull off a submission against Choi, who looked to be on his way to a decision win over Park. And I think that speaks a lot to Park. He's undefeated. He's great at finding the finish, whether it's with the submissions or the knockout. And going up against Shannon Ross, who really needs a win in this fight, I think that's great for Park because Shannon Ross has fought accumulatively in the UFC for under 2 minutes, getting finished by knockout in both of his fights. And Yong Park, who's so great at finding those finishes, rocking people on the feet, finishing them on the ground, or knocking them out, is probably going to get an easy finish in this fight. So I have to go with Yong Park. Next is Song Kenan versus Kevin Jousset. This is a close fight. Jousset's striking defense, I'm not the biggest fan of. He does keep his hands down, although he has a great jab and calf kick. I think if Song Kenan was to win this fight, it would be by KO. However, I think Jousset does have the offensive striking tools to give Kenan a very hard time on the feet. He has a great jab and he has a great calf kick, which in Kenan's fight against Ian Gary, that proved to give him a lot of trouble and eventually lead to Gary being able to find a finish against him. And I think Jousset can implement a similar game plan and also work in takedowns because he is a judo black belt and is very good on the ground. And if this fight does hit the ground, he will have a massive advantage. So in this fight, I'm going to go with Jousset, but I'm not 100% confident in this pick. Like I said, I do believe Kenan possibly could catch him on the feet, but I do like Jousset's overall well-rounded game, and he has multiple ways to win this fight outside of getting just a finish by knockout submission. He may also be able to win a decision, as I believe he has better cardio than Kenan Song. Moving on up the card to Hyun Park versus Andre Muniz. This is another very close fight. Muniz has had a hard time as of late with losses to Brendan Allen and Paul Craig, where they were able to hang with him on the ground and then eventually beat him on the judges' scorecards. I actually believe Paul Craig submitted Andre Muniz, but Yong Park, I think going into this fight, is won his past 4 or 5 fights. He has looked very good with his striking overall game. He has great durability, which allows him to move forward on the feet and keep a consistent forward motion behind his very good jab. And he also carries a lot of power. In these fights, he's been hitting people on the feet, dealing damage, rocking them, and then finishing them on the ground by rear naked choke. He has a good amount of submission victories. I believe in this fight, though, the deciding factor will be Park's wrestling defense, which I think he can stifle the takedown attempts of Muniz and outpower Muniz on the feet and really get Muniz tired with his consistent forward pressure. And with his consistent pressure, as it starts to wear on Muniz and get him tired, I believe it will be easier and easier for Park to survive on the ground with Muniz. And because of that, I have to go with Park in this fight, although I do believe it is a close fight. Moving on to the short notice replacement, Tim Elliott going up against Mudaerji. I believe for Mudaerji, in the rankings, he's ranked number 12. Elliott's ranked number 11. Around that whole area of 10 to 15, I believe Tim Elliott is one of the worst stylistic matchups for him as a guy that is very tall, long, awkward, unorthodox, but has very good cardio and a great grappling game. And I think that's what's really going to pay dividends in this fight is the awkwardness of Tim Elliott and his unorthodox setups. I think can really give Darji a hard time. And if Darji does fall into those setups, when the fight gets to the ground, Tim Elliott is great at just grinding and really wearing on his opponents and being able to just steal rounds, bank rounds. And Tim Elliott has been in there with some of the best fighters in the world, has fought a murderer's row for a long time. I believe his last loss was to Muhammad Mukayev. He's also fought Demetrius Johnson for the world title back when he was still part of the UFC, and actually had moments in that fight that he could have finished Demetrius Johnson by submission. And I think that experience, his overall game, the unorthodoxness of it is going to lead him to a win over Mudaerji by either submission or decision. Moving on to Nasrat Haqparast versus Jamie Mullarkey. This is another great fight. I believe this could possibly be one of those fights that is one of the bangers of the night, possible fight of the night. Nasrat Haqparast is a guy that always brings it, a pretty good wrestler, solid boxing, solid power. Same thing can be said with Mullarkey, who also is a little bit slower than Haqparast, but still has shown to be good on the feet, great takedown timing. However, I do believe a deciding factor in this fight will be the chin of Mullarkey, which has been exposed in some of his fights in the UFC. And I believe Haqparast, with being the more powerful of the two, with the cleaner boxing of the two, and also with his wrestling ability, can stifle the takedowns of Mullarkey, can hurt Mullarkey and possibly get him to the ground, and possibly even finish him on the feet by knockout. And that's why I have to go with Nasrat Haqparast in this fight. I think everything I just stated is just going to be a little bit too much for Jamie Mullarkey. The next fight is another fight that is going to be a great one as well, which is Khalil Rountree versus Anthony Smith. Khalil Rountree's on a 4-fight winning streak where he has looked extremely impressive, getting, I think, 3 finishes. And Anthony Smith has also been having fights where he's looked very good, even though he lost his last fight against Johnny Walker. Or actually, he won his last fight against Ryan Spann, lost his last fight against Johnny Walker, and he looked very good in his win against Spann. However, I think in this fight, what we've seen from Anthony Smith in the past is he has a susceptibility to leg kicks, which led to losses against Ankalaev and Johnny Walker. And I believe in this fight that could work against him, as Khalil Rountree comes from a more Muay Thai background and has some of the better leg kicks in the entire light heavyweight division. One of the tools Anthony Smith does have that's very good is his jab, which I think could prove to give Khalil Rountree issues. However, Khalil Rountree does also have a great overhand, and as I said before, his leg kick, which are all counters to the jab. And Anthony Smith has taken a lot of damage throughout his entire MMA career. And I think a fight with Khalil Rountree, a guy who can hurt him with his power, chop at his legs, land his overhand, I believe can stay away from the grappling advantage that Anthony Smith has and keep the fight on the feet, chop at his legs, take his legs out, and not fall him to the ground, make him get up and have to stand with him. And because of that, I have to go with Khalil Rountree in this fight. I think his power, his overall cleanness on the feet, I think are going to be a little bit too much in this fight. Moving on to the main event, Chris Gutierrez versus Song Yadong. A big thing going into this fight, I don't believe Gutierrez has gone 5 rounds before in his MMA career. He definitely has not in the UFC. This is his first main event. Song Yadong has gone 5 rounds with Sandhagen and with Ricky Simone, which he finished Ricky Simone in the 5th. And both those fights were fought at a very high pace and had a lot of grappling in them as well. And his cardio didn't wane in those fights. And he showed, especially in his Ricky Simone fight, that his power does carry round to round and even into the championship rounds, which is going to be big in this fight, as we've seen with Chris Gutierrez in his fight with Pedro Munoz. Pedro Munoz, who has, I would say, a more restricted and limited offensive striking game, mainly with his calf kicks and straights, not really setting them up that much, using the kick to set up the hands and not vice versa. I think that, and Chris Gutierrez in that fight got hurt by Pedro Munoz, and Munoz was able, once he got cracked by Munoz, it seemed like Chris Gutierrez, who really likes to set up behind his kicks, and his hands are pretty much a secondary factor. He throws jabs, some check hook straights. Once he got caught by Munoz, it seemed he was not comfortable in the pocket with Munoz as much, and he would feint. He would overly feint and not follow up behind those feints to make Pedro Munoz pay when he did at times bite on the feints. And I think that's going to work against him heavily against Song Yadong, who is extremely fast, has great boxing combos. In his fight with Ricky Simone, showed an improvement with his switch boxing combos, switching stances and landing great hooks and straights out of those. If he is to catch Gutierrez, I can see Gutierrez falling back into that pattern of overly feinting and just being there to be hit by Song Yadong, who his speed is blinding, and he is a lot faster than Pedro Munoz, and Pedro Munoz was also able to land some boxing combinations and straight hands, overhands on Chris Gutierrez. So I think I have to go with Song Yadong by 4th, 5th round finish or decision. And that is my picks for Yadong versus Gutierrez, and hope to see you all later this week when I'll be met with my other half, the infamous P, as we give our breakdowns for this weekend's fights. I'll see you all then.